Thank you. Wow. If you're impressed by me, you're really going to love our guest today. Good afternoon. My name is Jenelle Reilly. I'm the Deputy Awards and Feature Editor at Variety, and I'm so thrilled to welcome you to this Q&A with one of my favorite movies of the year, Calvary. At this time, please join me in welcoming the very talented lead actor of this film. I'm sure you've seen him in a dozen things, probably just in the last week. Probably recognize him from everything from his Golden Globe nominated performance in Bruges to simply one of the best performances I've ever seen in The General. And of course, he starred in that little franchise of independent films, Harry Potter. Please welcome Brendan Gleeson.
Thank you very much.
Oh, actors love you.
I love them.
This is actually a SAG audience, and so I always like to start by asking, how did you get your SAG card?
How on earth did I get my SAG card?
Who gave it to you? What were they thinking?
Yeah, I don't know. Turbulence was the first thing I did. Yeah, it was a big deal for me to get, a SAG card. It was kind of beyond what I thought might happen, but hoped would. And yeah, it was great to become a part of the community, and I came out and we shot. Turbulence was a funny film. It started off, I did an audition in New York about a guy escaping across the Canadian border, a convict, two convicts, Reilly and myself, as it turned out. And I did the worst American accent I had ever heard. And I talked to Ian Hart, who was around. I think Michael Collins or something was opening at the time in New York. And he said that he had driven home that evening with his teeth, having done an audition, as in, because he kind of had done the same. Anyway, I waved goodbye to that, and then I came over to LA, and I got the script, which was the same script, but it was about two convicts on an aeroplane, and I got the part. So obviously it was a Canadian border thing was the problem, not me.
Just a small change to the plot. Now you're on an airplane.
The thing had completely changed in the time it took me to get to New York to LA. The entire script had completely changed.
Wait, what was it called before Turbulence then?
Oh, I think Turbulence was always, yeah, I don't know. Now that you mention it, turbulence on the Canadian border doesn't really work, should it?
Someone realized that and they said, we need to change this, we need to put it on a plane.
Yeah, oh no, it was fun though, it was great, and it was a real privilege, to come over here and work in, I guess, work in the factory of a factory town, and the fact that everybody in the place that you passed in the street was talking about a script or something was very exotic and, yeah, pretty exhilarating.
But you'd done movies before then, hadn't you?
Oh yeah, no, I'd done films at home.
You starred in movies.
I had the odd one here and there, I suppose. Starting is always an odd word. No, I'd worked on Braveheart, which was a massive Hollywood movie, and that was, I guess, the first time I saw what Hollywood could produce was they were filming Far and Away in Dublin, and I was shooting a thing called The Treaty, which is a TV movie about the whole setting up of the Irish Free State initially. And I was playing Michael Collins, which was a big thing for me. And they asked me to come for a night on Far and Away, and I said, well, I don't think so, I'm doing something else. And eventually, anyway, they said they'd pay me some money, and I said, okay. And I had no dialogue the following day or something, so I went for the night, and they had completely converted Temple Bar in Dublin into this old Boston or somewhere, with fake cobbles on the thing, and people were washing down with big hoses, and Tom Cruise was going around, and there were people hanging around in barriers all over Dublin City trying to get a glimpse of him, and it was the scale of the whole thing was exhilarating, and I kind of thought, oh wow, I could live with this now. This is not something drove me into acting, but God, this is so fun, the scale of it, and the professionalism of it, and commitment was just. So that was the first sign I got of it. But Braveheart came, and I got to do a bit of it in Ireland and Scotland. But as I say, Turbulence was the first time I came over here.
And now you're back in Ireland for Calvary. And this film is written and directed by John Michael McDonough,
Right.
who you previously made The Guard with.
Yeah.
And you've also, yeah, sure. I won't object to that.
Thank you.
You've also worked with his brother, Martin McDonough, who most of us probably know him as a playwright, but he's also made some fantastic movies like In Bruges and Six Shooter, which
Six Shooter,
won the
yeah.
Oscar that you starred in.
That's right.
Starred, sorry.
Thank you.
You don't seem to like that word. How did you go about becoming the McDonough brothers' muse?
I think they might dispute that, but I had, well, oddly enough, I had seen the plays. I'd seen the trilogy, Martin McDonagh's trilogy in Druid, in all in a row. They did a whole day of the three plays, which was like the best theatrical experience I think I've ever seen. I was kind of dreading it, watching three plays one after the other, until you become immersed in what it is, and then it was just fantastic. And then my son Donal, who had gone more or less with the idea of working behind the camera as against in front of it, got a script for The Lieutenant of Inishmore, and he read that, thought it was the best thing he'd ever read, and he went for an audition for it, and he got the part, and he ended up going to the West End first of all, and then he got a nomination for a Tony off Broadway. So he got in there first. And I met Martin after that then, and he came to me with the short, and that's where it started.
So is Martin kind of the reason your son went into acting?
Yeah, I can kind of blame him for that. And yeah, it became, no, as soon as he got involved, and he was completely kind of in love with it, the way you do, and that was the end of that. But I've always liked, he's interesting behind the camera too, and I hope he doesn't forget about it. It's he's got a good eye, and he's got an interesting sensitivity and sensibility, so it'll be interesting to see what he produces.
How did you feel when your children told you they wanted to go into acting?
Go ahead. Well, you can't stop it. You know the feeling. I mean, I was 34 before I went full-time. I always loved it, and when I went full-time, it opened my eyes with regard to the kind of people that are involved in it. I had a kind of a different vision of it. We get quite a bad press in an odd way. There's a feeling that people are very self-centered, that people are very lacking in loyalty, and that there's a lot of knives out in the profession. And when I actually did bite the bullet and go full-time, I was completely knocked back by the idealism of people involved in this profession and the openness. People would tell you about auditions for a part they were up for, inviting their own competition. And helping each other out. There was a kind of an aspirational quality to the people I met in the business that was quite staggering. And I felt an idiot, really, for having believed what I had believed before. Why
did it take you so long to go full-time?
Partly because I wanted to keep it under my own control. I went for an audition in the Abbey. After I finished, I kind of messed around for a couple of years, and then I went back to college for 3 years. I came out and I went for an audition in the Abbey. I was doing, the group of us from school had kind of combined together to form a theatre company and do, on an amateur level, do bits and pieces. Some of us were writing and doing all that. And it's a good way to find stuff out. It's a great training ground in a way. But I went to go for the Abbey, and I made a complete hames of the audition. Firstly, because I thought I was going to be on a podium or a stage or something. And it turned out there were 3 people across a desk in front of me, and I couldn't handle it, really, and I completely imploded. And I was watching people going around, and there was a guy kind of hauling on a chain somewhere up here, and there was another guy sort of more or less, and it all seemed, God, like, they don't seem to be enjoying themselves very much, and I just had a miserable sort of a thing, so I said, like, forget it, and I'll do it in my own time. So I went teaching school, which I kind of enjoyed, and I had met a guy at college called Paul Mercier, who was writing a lot of stuff initially in the Irish language, and then he went into English, and he started writing these the first one was a rock musical, and then he went on to write really vibrant, entertaining, pulsating plays set in suburban Dublin, in a place that basically had been forgotten about. Everybody talked about the West, or they talked about the inner city stuff from O'Casey, but this is where people lived. And he wrote these fantastic sort of specifically with people in mind who didn't go to theatre. And then he went out and he'd paper all the stuff. He'd put complimentary stuff, you know, he'd go to all the dole offices and give them 10 to 20 free tickets to this place. And the whole thing started to have a momentum, and all through the 80s, that's more or less what we did. We kind of, we went at theatre in a really sort of interactive way. We got thousands upon thousands of people coming, and it turned into a real thing. It was fun, and it felt right. So I kind of think, well, I prefer to be doing it this way, where I can control it. But then it all began to get a little bit much.
Were you working like a survival job during the day?
I was teaching kids, you know. It was like, it was about, I loved the kids, you know. It was like, I was teaching secondary school, all boys school. They were a funny bunch of people. And they kind of keep you entertained, you know. You forget about people in their teens. I had this vision, because my own teenhood was kind of, there was a fair amount of angst going on. And then you go back to teaching school and you forget how much you laugh when you're a teenager. You always forget how much you laugh. You laugh in a way you will never laugh again in your life, because everything, all the adult stuff is fresh. You know, you're getting the first kind of green shoots of kind of just being able to express yourself as a person, finding things out, obviously completely confused about who you are, but at the same time, you can knock a good laugh out of it. So I had a good time for about 10 years. And it did become a bit much near the end, and I said, okay, it's time to make a decision.
I bet actually being a teacher prepared you really well for this role.
For this one, well, we tried to keep this as close. You know, I talked to John about, I couldn't remember whether we discussed it prior to it when the final script started, and about his previous life. And we kind of had assumed, I think almost without doing it, that he was a teacher, because the guy he meets in prison, Donald's part, is a former pupil of his. That's the way it was. And it was a funny, we both kind of just agreed to it without even thinking about it. He just seemed that sort of a guy.
So you were working on the Guard, I believe, when he brought up the idea for Calvary?
I brought up the idea.
Oh, you did?
I know, we were both discussing, the idea. There had been priests who had been falsely accused of child molestation and things like that, and a lot of whom were correctly accused of child molestation, and it's a very tough time for everybody involved. But I remember we ended up in the conversation talking about how it must be, and my kind of preoccupation would be how, if you dedicated your life to being committed to doing good stuff, and then you get tarred with the notion of being you know, a paedophile, which is such a gross, abusive thing. How do you maintain yourself? And John had been thinking about, like, he's a total cinema head. He knows every film that's ever been made, and he was kind of thinking about a good priest for a good while. And he said, if I write it, will you do it? And I said, for sure, absolutely. I mean, who wouldn't? And so that's how it kind of came about. We were both discussing something, and it just seemed like, wow, that's a really rich and interesting place to go.
And when he first sent you the script, I mean, were you kind of like, well, I said I would do this?
Oh no! I mean, he sent me. I was privileged enough. He gave me the more or less his first, not the first draft, but he went, you know, at an early stage, and I was completely blown away by it, as you would have to be. It was an exquisite piece of writing, and I was able to give my tuppence halfpenny worth back to him, and it wasn't offensive. And there were a few things that I kind of felt, you know, he'd go back and he made his own of it. But it was a kind of it felt as if this was a joint project from the beginning, and we had a great time on the Guard too. I mean, I really respect him, and he's a good friend apart from anything else. But his vigor and his talent is obvious, but the vigor with which he approaches his work, you know, he has no time for sticking in bits of stuff that just aren't there because that's why they should be there. He's going around and he's switching little things on the set. Every comma, everything has a reason to be there. And there's somebody, you know, working with somebody of that vigor, you know, it gives you a place to strive towards, and it gives you the ability, hopefully, to try and raise the bar a little higher.
He actually credits you with really helping him improve the script. I think one of the things he said was you suggested more interaction between the daughter, played by Reilly.
Yeah, I mean, he writes tenderness so well. John gives himself a very hard press with regard to he does this thing where he pretends to be a terribly hard man altogether, which he can be. He can be tough, but the tenderness he writes is extraordinarily beautiful, I think, and it's really at the heart of what his work is for me. And when the idea of this man's daughter, it was also obviously easier for me as a parent of 4 lads. I have no daughter, but you know, for somebody to arrive back with bandages around their wrist, the image is enough to get me going. And it seemed easy to. I knew this man as soon as as soon as those scenes were there. They hadn't been. She kind of disappeared a little bit earlier in the movie. The scene with the phone call where they talk about forgiveness, which is quite a pivotal thing now. I think that came from those discussions. And I mean, I wouldn't try to claim credit for that script. I was really honoured to be included and to give my input to it. But it's John's script, and I was lucky enough to be able to inhabit it.
So in addition to you, basically every great Irish actor is in this movie. And you have such wonderful chemistry with all of them. Did you, I imagine that it's, you all hang out at a bar together, but maybe that's not the case. Had you met Kelly before or Aidan?
No. She was extraordinary. And it was a thing John had I remember emailed me about, what do you think about the daughter being English? And it opened up a whole thing for us as well in terms of his history. That he had been to London too, that he wasn't just closeted away in some small place in Ireland. He'd seen life. It was very important that he was a man who was not naive. And it all seemed to hang together. So I knew this, but it's like, you listen to a radio play and you have your vision of somebody. Everybody has their own take on it. So who was Kelly going to, who was the daughter going to be? And then Kelly came in and we knew within like 3 seconds that this was not just what was in the script, but something over that, more than that. And I remember the first scene we did was the one where she arrives in my room, and I'm reading Moby Dick, and she's going around, and she looks around, and she says, "No photos, and not even of Mum," And I knew from just when she arrived in, we had a chat the night before. We'd done some rehearsals over the week before, and there was something about the vulnerability and just. Something incredible she brought into the room. So, yeah, everybody I think brought their A game. It was one of those fantastic projects where it became personal for everybody, and people wanted to be as good as they could be. You could feel it, and they inhabited their characters in a way that was so real. I mean, a lot of my stuff was dependent on what was coming at me, and it was always true.
Obviously, someone you knew before the movie was your son. For those who don't know, his son plays the prisoner. Really? You didn't know that? Okay. I feel like I'm scolding you. Sorry, there's no reason you should know that. And
I didn't bring him up very well.
And actually, John went out of his way to sort of make him look different from you.
Well, he did. And I think Donald had a lot to do with that as well. It was. I think John was a little reluctant because you don't want it to be okay. Oh, this is the bit where the two of them do father and son bit, and that's anything that brings you outside a movie is usually not a good idea. There was I think a couple of inspirations for that particular character from real life. So this is not something that was plucked out of the air. There have been prisoners who have said things such as what this guy says. They're not direct quotes, and it's not a particular person. But the look and all that, between the two of them, they came up with something that most people, even who know Donald, the scene was over before they copped on that, Jesus, that was Donald. There was a familiarity about him maybe at home. But his hair was obviously dark. He's got ginger hair, he's a Weasley. And so he had all that dark thing coming, that kind of odd sort of bang in the front. And I was unsure about all that stuff. That's why we kind of parted ways about a week beforehand, because I for me, it was all in the words, And I was afraid he was going to get all freaky and look a little bit weird. And and that was, but actually the words were more powerful than all that. So we had to say, okay, look, just let's stay away. And so I stayed away from him, and he stayed away from me, and he developed into this thing that became really unsettling. And we went in that day, and we hadn't spoken, and I was pounding up and down on one side. There was this massive big room in Kilmainham jail. It was actually in an old disused jail, and it was a room almost as big as this, brilliantly set up. John had it brilliantly set up, and we were in the middle, and Donal was over there doing his thing, pacing up and down, and I was pacing up and down the opposite side, and we came out. It was like a boxing match. We just kind of went out, went slugging at it, and it was just great. I mean, I was delighted to get him back at the end of the day, but it was great because everything I hit him with, he hit it right back at me, and Martin McDonagh actually came in that day, and oddly enough, Martin hadn't read the script, which is bizarre to me, but that's the McDonoughs for you. And he came in, and halfway through he said, "I thought you said this was a comedy."
I mean, there are some really funny things in this
Yeah.
movie, but it's not a broad comedy like The Guard was.
No.
Was it hard to leave the character at the end of the day? Are you the kind of actor who, takes your work home with you sometimes?
I try not to be. I don't do I have never done the actual method thing in a purposeful way. But I remember when I was doing The General, there was one Friday evening, my wife said to me in a really cold, vicious tone, "How dare you bring that man home?" And so it does bleed into something. I mean, the more you get to do this, and the better people you get to work with, the more you understand that a lot of it is about trying to find the common humanity, and you'll find that most truthfully in your own being somewhere. So there is a bleeding of one into the other at times. I try to minimize it in terms of outside the actual filming, but with this one, the questions were of a certain profundity, I suppose, or there were core questions that were being asked, and I found myself being taken back into a place that was more akin to childhood, really, in terms of where you go to confession, you go to communion at about 7 years of age. You've reached the use of reason at that point, just in case anybody doesn't know, and the use of reason. So you probably have sinned. So you go and you get your sins cleansed, and you come out and you receive communion. So you're in a state of grace, and you come out feeling like utterly sort of joyous about the notion that there's a certainty in the world, and that goodness is in the ascendancy, and that you have purged your sins. And in an odd way, when I put on the vestments initially when we were doing wardrobe, I began to get this feeling, you're the guardian of all that now. That's for you to look after. So that's a big responsibility. I got goosebumps. I kind of said, that's not like me, really. But wardrobe is funny that way. Oftentimes you just know in wardrobe, and I know very little about clothes, but generally you know when it's right and you know when it's wrong. And something like that can... so yeah, afterwards, I have found I'm still processing that film. And in terms of what its implications are, I find myself referring to it in terms of those things, which is unusual for me.
What was the hardest scene for you to shoot?
That's a good question. They were all hard. I'll be honest with you, they were all hard. Every single bloody scene in that thing. I was getting driven further and further and further away to where, it began to, from starting out from a position of confidence that I could tackle these questions, the relentless nature of the despair that was being shoved on my lap and what I was being asked to deal with got steadily more difficult. One of the scenes that I think about a lot, I mean, all the scenes with Kelly were hugely emotional. I mean, they just were. Sometimes they were very beautiful, and sometimes they were heartbreaking. The one scene for me that stands out a little bit was one we almost lost because of the tightness of the schedule. And it was always an important one for me because I remember reading it and thinking, this is where we are now. And it's the scene where he's walking down the road, and this young girl is there, and he tries to just engage in conversation with her. And as you know, the parent comes up and says, What were you talking about? What were you doing? What were you saying to her? And it just besmirched everything that was natural and beautiful in the world. It's like you can't talk to a young girl on a road, but you are a defiler. It came into the heart of what we talked about all that time back in Galway. You know, and it's not even just about religion. It's not even just about spirituality. There's something essentially broken in the fact that a man walking down a road cannot talk to a young girl anymore without it having all of these horrible sort of overtones and dangers. You can't really take a person in the supermarket anymore and go and find their mother, because you got to make sure that somebody's... I mean, there's something broken where that is what society has brought itself to. So that, for me, as I say, we're losing the light and everything. It had to be photographed in such a way that he doesn't look like a predator coming up, because we can't feel it. It has to be a surprise for the audience. So trying to get it, we're running out of light, and trying to get, I think it was a Steadicam, but I don't think we had the Steadicam, maybe just a handheld, can't remember. But we were coming down, and it was the idea of how the distances could be choreographed so that it became a surprise and a natural way of starting a conversation. All the nice things in life where you can chat to people, and then for it to turn into what it did. So that was the one for me always that upset me the most, I think.
But you got it.
I think we did, yeah. And the next one, it cuts immediately, and he's at the bar. He wants whiskey. He's had it. That's the one where he's had it. He's had it. He can't take it anymore.
Yeah, I know there were, some logistical complications also for the scene where the dog dies.
Yeah.
Like the dog could only be knocked out for 15 minutes, was it?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, look, John got really upset. Like everybody in every audience, and every audience asked just one question: who killed the dog? It's not. I mean, I've got my brains blown out, and everybody wants to know who killed the dog. And John himself, in the shooting of that, was very worried that the dog had to be sedated. And and of course you always have to get all the little stuff at the bottom that tells you about how, there's a 0.05% that something will happen if you don't do this and whatever. So he was more upset about the dog than he was about anything else. But the dog was perfectly safe. But it was, he didn't want to do it a second time.
Sure.
And it's the time that he actually, that Father James, it really gets to him, the guy really gets to him at that one. And it's a fantastic payoff at the end in terms of, why do you cry over a dog and not over a child? Why do you do that? Why are we doing that? Why does everybody do it? Every audience asks about the dog. And I'm not being facetious about that. Like, it's an interesting thing. And the payoff is great, but it meant that the emotional engagement on that take, there were very few takes.
Yeah, 15 minutes, that's
nothing. And it was a question of, as well, I didn't want to force, you can't go straight into a thing. First of all, there's a realization of what you're looking at. It was so dark. And it has, it was that shocking thing. Do you react like you imagine you'd react when something shocking happens? Very rarely. And this was something where he had to immediately access his own emotions. So that was it was a tough scene for a number of reasons. So the dog was just there sleeping. Like.
Yeah, it was easy on the dog.
Easy on the dog.
And he was fine.
He was a lovely dog.
What about shooting the opening scene? Because it's such a powerful scene. A lot of it is you reacting. They say acting is reacting. And I don't know if people know this, but the person who is the killer in the movie is not in that scene with you.
No. And I'll tell you who it was. It was David Wilmot, who plays the younger priest, who I think was absolutely brilliant with his little hot water bottle.
He voiced the killer at the beginning?
Well, we did that near the end of the shoot. It was almost, not an afterthought, but it was like when we got all the big stuff done. This was a set that had been put up in some little back of a factory somewhere, the confessional. And David was the guy around who fed me the stuff, and he did brilliantly. But it's not his voice.
Right.
And after that, so yeah, the reaction in terms of that, like it was really intense, his reading of it, and it was part of what's brilliant when you get a collaborative set, and it's always driven from the top, is that you get the quality of lines fed off camera that you're going to get on. And this, David it wasn't his part even. And he delivered this like a staggering sort of version of this confessional. So reacting to it, I have to thank him a lot for, because it was so in the moment. After that, then the question John had was whether he, his initial thought was that he would give 2 lines to each of the suspects, and go down and have it as a sort of a collage of different voices over the soundtrack. And I think it was one of the things that Martin had an influence on. He said, nobody's going to be listening to the words. They're going to be figuring, oh, okay, and that they're different people, and we're looking at a priest and they won't be able to assimilate this, which, that those words are pretty, they're pretty a show-stopping kind of way to jump in. So it was important for people to concentrate on them, so they got a different actor altogether.
I do want to ask a couple of audience questions. I have one from Victor. It wants to know, what would you have done differently if you weren't an actor?
I suppose we still teach in school and getting people up on stage or something. That's the way I kind of ended up, and I loved it while I was doing it. I would have had to reinvent myself a little bit. I would have I think, got out of the school I was in, gone somewhere else just to refresh. It's a hard business, teaching, and you have to stay fresh or you're not worth anything to anybody. So I guess that's what I'd be at.
A question from Mark. Very easy to pronounce names, thank you. Wants to know if your preparation for a role changes based upon the size or budget of the project. For example, Kingdom of Heaven, big budget movie, versus Calvary, which, I don't know, can you say what the budget was on this movie? You might not know, actually. I think
it's about 5 or 6 or something. $5 or $6 million, I think.
And $4 million of that was your salary. Yeah.
Totally. It's worth it. Yeah, I think it was about 5. I think it was $1 million less than the Guard. I think I remember John saying that. The preparation, no. I mean, unless it entails going to Mexico or something, which I've never really had the luxury of doing. No, it doesn't. No, preparation is always about really trying to get yourself into where you should be, into who you should be. And I don't think the budget makes a whole pile of difference. Obviously, when you put on, swords and all sorts of stuff, you kind of, it all has an influence on who you and how you feel you're doing what you're doing. And if you're out, in a different environment on location, it all has an impact. I don't think the smaller little sets are always going to do it for you in the same way the big movies can influence you like that. But essentially, the preparation is the same.
You've never shot a movie in Mexico? You've made so many movies.
I did. We went down to, we did Troy down there.
In Mexico?
Yeah.
Really? Ancient Greece was
absolutely
shot in Mexico.
Yeah. In the Baja, yeah.
And what's up next for you? I know you're going to be reteaming with John again.
I'm hoping, that'll happen. He wants to write a third part of this trilogy, which he's now calling it a trilogy. Because it's 2 and there's only one off 3. So he wants to turn me into a gloriously abusive paraplegic, is how he puts it. He shot the Guard in Connemara, because his father's from Connemara in West Galway. He's shot Calvary in Sligo, which is where his mother is from, and he's from South London, so he wants me as a paraplegic in South London, banging into everything and abusing people for the fact that I'm disabled.
Are you getting into character now, preparing for that role?
Yeah, he reckons that all I have to do is kind of do this, sit. I'm in practice right now, but he keeps telling me I'm going to have to go to the gym and build up my arms and everything to be pushing this stuff around, so I'll wait for the script.
Yeah. And what else is up next? I understand you're about to do a play?
Yeah, I'm going to do a play with my 2 sons, Donal and Brian, who are actors. And we were kind of trawling for something to do together, and Donal saw a play by Enda Walsh called The Walworth Farce, which is, it's a tragedy done as a farce, if you can imagine that. And it's about a dysfunctional father and 2 sons. And the father keeps the 2 sons in a flat on the Walworth Road and makes them reenact for an actor's trophy a farce which purports to tell how they got there.
So he said, I found this role of an abusive father. I want you to play it.
Yeah, we can draw from life experience hugely on this one. And that's, it's going to be difficult though. I mean, we're all a little bit tentative about whether you know, we have a director, Sean Foley. We thought that was a good idea to have a referee, and hopefully it will definitely be a lot of fun. But you know, I'm sure there'll be times we'll have little bits of. So we made a little bit of a pact that we'll walk away if it's harming our own relationship. We'll walk away and count to 291 or whatever it takes before we go back at it. So yeah, we'll do that. I'll rehearse over Christmas. And do it for about 4 weeks in the Olympia in Dublin. So that's where I did a lot of that early theatre. Actually, we used to transfer to the Olympia, and it's one of these old Victorian playhouses. It's fantastic how much they knew how to present a thing. You know, the acoustics are great. The audience seems really close, but it's 1,200 seater, and yeah, there's a rake on the stage, all that stuff. So it'll be fun. Amazing.
Well, I can't wait to see what you do next. I so appreciate you being here today. And again, congratulations on a beautiful movie.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,